You're listening to Blue No Buzz, the St. Louis Blues podcast by fans for fans. Thanks for joining us today. Alright guys, welcome to Blue Note Buzz, episode 1. I'm Isaac Hyman, I'm the host. I know what you're probably thinking, who does this guy think he is, sharing his hockey opinions with the world? Who are you? So let me get right into that, just kind of explain. Like I said, my name is Isaac, I'm from Kentucky. I am 26 years old. I created this podcast just to kind of an outlet to give my opinions and my takes on hockey, as well as discuss like recent news related to the team. This podcast obviously is going to be very St. Louis Blues centered. I'm a super fan of the St. Louis Blues. I became a fan a few years ago. Since then, I've watched every single game for the last few seasons. Although I did kind of grow up as a fan of both the Cardinals and the Blues. I have family that's from St. Louis, so it's kind of in my blood. I was raised to be a St. Louis sports fan. So I was kind of born into it, but I've really embraced it in the last few years. And that's why I wanted to create this, because I've got a lot of opinions, and you guys will see that soon. So the first thing I wanted to do for this episode is kind of do a quick recap of last season, look at some of the off-season moves that the Blues have made so far, and then a quick look ahead to next season. I know it's kind of odd to start a podcast during the off season. I had initially planned to wait until the start of the new season, but with so much going on, especially in the last week, I couldn't help myself. I had to launch the podcast so we can discuss some of the things that are going on. So let's look back to last season. Overall, the team performed well above expected. Going into the year, I think we were expected to be not a bottom tier team, but probably a tier out of the playoffs. Just kind of a very mediocre team, not a very high ceiling, a lot of older players on the roster, especially on defense. So that was the general consensus going into the year. And based on what the roster was heading into the season, it's not a crazy take. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is the masterclass that Doug Armstrong put up last season. So it was just an absolute beautiful season for him as the GM. Obviously, last offseason, he set up the team for success early by offer sheeting Broberg and Holloway, who both ended up being absolute studs, especially Holloway. He is such a steal. He signed Jim Montgomery the second he was fired from Boston. He said, yep, I'll take Jim Montgomery over Drew Bannister any day. And it obviously paid dividends. The team was much, much better under Monty. And then the other thing that he did that I think people now are starting to give a lot more recognition for, especially with his performance in the postseason, but trading for Cam Fowler, he was one of the statistically worst defensemen in the league before making that trade. So he got a lot of criticism, Doug did, when he made that trade. A lot of people were like, oh, here we go, another mediocre old defenseman. But as soon as he came to the Blues, the guy was an absolute stud. He was a wall on defense. He could really get offense going. He was a great quarterback on the power play as well. And his slap shot from the blue line is impressive. So he was awesome. So all three of those things that Doug did last season are what allowed us to play so well after the Four Nations face-off and eventually squeak into that playoff spot. Obviously, the end of the season was incredibly disappointing. Only the Blues could do this. You know, they exceed expectations greatly and then still manage to end in a disappointing way. That 1.6 seconds will haunt me for years to come, as I'm sure it will most of you. I don't think we would have had a serious shot at the Cup, given how well the Stars and the Oilers were playing. But still, would have been awesome to win the series, and to lose in that way was just really tough. Why was this team so bad at 6v5s? That's something that they really need to kind of dig into in the offseason, and I hope they're working on it. I hope Monty has some plans drawn up, because we were by far the worst team in 6v5 last season. We had more goals scored against us in 6v5 then we had empty net goals over the course of the entire season, which is just absolutely bonkers. Can't do that and win the playoffs, obviously. So yeah, hopefully they're working on that. That was our biggest flaw, I think, last year, was just closing out those close games when we were leading. I think that Monty's gonna go into the lab this offseason. I think we'll be a lot better next year. So the first offseason move I wanted to talk about was probably the biggest one, the Bolduc trade. I loved the Duke. He was quickly becoming one of my favorite players, as I saw a lot of Blues fans were saying. I did not see this trade coming. I thought Bolduc was going to be a huge part of our future, a huge piece to build around. One of those young guys that can score, especially on the power play. However, the more I've thought about it, the more it makes sense. So when I first heard about this trade, I was just in shock. I immediately was angry. I was like, no, Bolduc. But now that I've thought about it, our defensive need far outweighs our offensive need. So when you look at our top six, a lot of holes, a lot of injuries, and it makes sense to move a young scorer for someone that can be a top six defenseman, especially when you have people like Snuggerud, Kyrou, Holloway. All these guys can score and create plays, not to mention Robert Thomas. People like Bolduc wasn't really our centerpiece, so I kind of see why Doug did that. We definitely need good defense. I will miss his slap shot on the power play though. That was a thing of beauty. So the new guy is Logan Mailloux. He's only played 7 games in the NHL last year for the Canadiens. He had 2 goals and 2 assists in those games, which is impressive offensively from a defenseman. I was reading a lot of discussion online right after this was announced, both in like Blues communities and in Canadiens communities, and a lot of the Canadiens fans were saying that he has a really great shot and is an offensive power. So that'll be nice. But the reason why we traded was to get better defensively, and unfortunately, that is by far his weakest area. So he's a defenseman that doesn't play great defense right now. He's bad at reading quick on-ice situations and offensive schemes. I went back and watched some clips from the games that he played, and he does look lost out there sometimes. If he can figure that out, which my hope is playing under Jim Montgomery, playing with guys like Parayko and Fowler and Falk, I'm hoping that he'll be able to round out his game a lot more, get better defensively, and if he can do that, this could end up being a great move. Obviously, this is kind of risky for a guy that did not play very much last year. Their team did not put him in the top 6 for the vast majority of the year. But maybe it's a situation like Holloway where he was being, underutilized, and if he's given a consistent top 6 spot, he could really flourish. So that's my hope. I think Doug Armstrong really deserves our faith after the things that I discussed about what he did last year. I think, we'll give him some grace. We'll see how this pans out. I'm not going to cast any judgment yet. I did see some fans already getting upset, but let Doug work. It could be like a Fowler situation where it doesn't seem good on paper, but then it ends up being a really big move for the team. Another huge move that the Blues made was signing Pius Suter. So that was an unexpected move for me personally. I didn't think we were going to get a caliber player like that. He's a great center. He's really a Swiss Army knife player. He can slot in basically anywhere, but we'll likely put him in at 2C, I assume, because that was our most glaring need on the offensive side. Doing that will allow us to bump Shen down to 3C, which I think fits his play style and fits where he's at in his career a lot better. So hopefully he'll perform better there. Obviously, with Suter on the second line, he's gonna provide offensive power, and he's experienced, so he's been around. He's not gonna get phased, so he'll really steady the team, especially on that second line with the young guys around him. So I think this was an amazing free agent signing, especially for the price that they got him for. It was $4.125 million a year for 2 years. So short-term contract, relatively low cost, especially when you look at what some of the other free agents were going for this year. Really impressed that we got this. Last year with the Canucks, he kind of had a breakout season. He scored 25 goals and had 46 total points. So he had a big season last year. So hopefully he can continue that on our team, and hopefully being surrounded by, even more skilled offensive players, maybe he could bump those numbers up even more. So I absolutely love this signing. Super excited to see what Suter does for the team next year. He's a great player, so can't say enough good things about this one. I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch, but super excited to see what he does for us in the next couple of years. Next up, I just wanted to really quickly touch on the other signing that we made. We got rid of Foxa, which I think was kind of a mutual decision. It seemed like he wanted to go back to Dallas. And for the price that we were paying him, it made sense to let him walk. Obviously, it's really unfortunate to see the WTF line, that fan favorite line, split up, but it is what it is. And we went out and signed a Foxa replacement. So relatively quickly, we've got that 4C lined up. So it was Nick, and I apologize if I pronounce this wrong, Björkstad. He was signed to a 2-year contract with a $1.75 million average annual value, which is a great deal for the Blues, a very team-friendly contract. I was very impressed that we were able to do that. This signing adds a lot of much-needed depth at center when combined with the Suter signing. Last year, 3 or 4C had to be Sonny, which is just crazy, so this will allow him to move to the wing for one of those bottom 2 lines. This is a great replacement for Fox. This is a guy very similar. He's a veteran center that you know what you're going to get night in and night out. So you know that he's going to show up, put in the work, and grind it out with these guys. And you know what you're going to get. The last move that I wanted to discuss here was Nick Leddy being put on waivers. I know a lot of people, when this was announced, were, cheering, screaming from the rooftops. They were so happy. I have somewhat of an unpopular opinion on Nick Leddy. I don't think he's bad. A couple years ago, he had to be the first pair defenseman with Parayko and really did not perform poorly. I think his injury this last season, he came back, and I think the injury might still have been bothering him. Obviously, Nick Leddy provides some great skating and some defensive zone passing into the offensive zone. So he can kind of get pressure out of the D zone, which sometimes we can struggle with. The amount of times that I screamed clear the puck last season. So Nick Leddy definitely was a big piece in being able to get out of the defensive zone and not just get it out, but create an offensive opportunity pretty quickly on a breakaway. He had great vision, great skater. He was just kind of the odd man out at this point with our defensive core. And with the price we were paying him, it just made a lot of sense for us to put him on waivers and see if someone took him. And sure enough, within a day, the San Jose Sharks picked him up. I think he'll be just fine for them. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he has a little bit of a return to form next year, having the offseason off, getting completely healthy, a little R&R. I'd like to see him do well in San Jose. Got nothing against the guy, but this was a smart move, from a team perspective moving forward, especially with how our defense is shaking out right now. With how well Tucker played last year, obviously his injury that put him out of the postseason was really painful for the team, but with how well he was playing, I'm really excited to see how he develops next year. Not only is he a big defenseman and a big body and always willing to scrap, but he actually had quite a good offensive edge last year. I was surprised by the amount of goals he got. His slapper from the blue line is nasty. So I'm looking forward to him continuing to grow as a player. Still relatively young guy. Not very many expectations going into last year, and I think he was quickly becoming a fan favorite as well. Just the amount of fights he got into, the amount of times he riled up the crowd, got the team going. That's exactly what you need on the blue line, especially for like a third pairing. Have a guy that's just an absolute truck out there. Another D-man that I wanted to touch on while we were kind of discussing the D-man was Corey Schooneman. If the name does not ring a bell, I don't blame you. He played, I believe, 3 games near the beginning of last year when we were in a really tough spot. I think we had like 3 injured defensemen, and he had to be slotted in. We used a couple of other prospects that were clearly not NHL ready, and Schoenemann I thought performed very well. He was reading the offense well. He was getting back. He was shutting down 1v1s, 2v1s. So I was really impressed. I'm surprised that more people didn't notice that and talk about him. He's still just playing for the Thunderbirds right now, but I would love to see him get called up again, see if he can continue to develop. So yeah, that's someone that I'm saying keep an eye out. Hopefully Corey Schoenemann will get another shot this year. I'm a big, if Corey Schoenemann has no fans, I'm no longer on this earth. All right, I'm the biggest Corey Schoenemann fan, and I think he's going to do some great things for us. Hopefully he gets that opportunity next year. And I believe that will wrap just about everything up. I did want to touch on basically what this podcast is going to be about a little bit more. I plan to release episodes once every week during the season. In the off season, how it is with news, you don't know what's going to happen. It could be once every other week, could be once a month. But as soon as the season starts, I will be starting to upload once weekly, doing like analysis of the games for the week. I'm going to talk about like the stars for those games, my heroes and zeros, which is something that I do on my website, Blue Note Buzz, as well. So I'd like to discuss that, just kind of my thoughts on how the team played, any notes that I might have made while watching the games, and then, of course, to look ahead at the next week's games and kind of discuss those, see how those matchups are. And then, of course, by the end of the year, we'll discuss the playoffs a lot and that larger NHL-wide situation. But that's the plan for now. I really appreciate you listening. If you listened all the way through, these are just some of my quick opinions on some moves that the Blues have made in the off season. I'm looking forward to creating more content and spreading my opinion to anyone who will listen. So if that's you, then thank you so much.